seated.
Thank you, Bob. Dun, dun, dun. All right. So there's a guy named Morgan Housel. He's an investor and an author, and he's written a couple of books, some of which you might have read. His books have sold like millions of copies, so it's possible that some of you know his stuff, particularly if you're interested in investing. His first book was called The Psychology of Money, and the second is called Same as Ever. He calls Same as Ever a guide to what never changes, and is full of insights, in particular about investing, but more broadly in general, just about life. And one of the chapters in that book is titled, Best Story Wins. Here's an excerpt. The best story wins. Not the best idea or the right idea or the most rational idea, but just whoever tells a story that catches people's attention and gets them to nod their heads is the one who tends to be rewarded. Great ideas explained poorly can go nowhere, while old or wrong ideas told compellingly can ignite a revolution. There's too much information in the world for everyone to calmly sift through the data looking for the most rational, most correct answer. People are busy and emotional, and a good story is always more powerful and persuasive than ice-cold statistics. Okay, now, if I had not given you that setup, and I'd simply asked, hey, what is Jesus' best, most common teaching method? I think you would have been able to tell me, right? Jesus asked a lot of questions, and he made a number of statements. But I don't think there's any real debate that his preferred mode of teaching was what? Parables. The dude just told stories, right? Some of Jesus' parables were extremely well developed. You might think of the story of the prodigal son. That's rather long. It's got a whole story arc. Some are very, very brief, just exist in sketch form. But either way, the long ones, the short ones, all of them, Jesus' stories have been thought about, chewed on, considered, and pondered for literally thousands of years by millions, maybe billions of people, right? Jesus told the best stories. Dave mentioned last week that we are resuming our survey through the Gospel of Matthew. We started it, I don't even know when, a year ago, a couple years ago, it's been a while. And the way that we're doing it is we're just looking at one vignette from each chapter. So it's not really comprehensive. We're just kind of just dropping in each chapter to kind of catch these glimpses of the life and the teachings of Jesus. And this morning, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 13. For my money, Matthew 13 is the single most important chapter in all of the Gospels if you want to understand Jesus' parables. The way that Matthew organized it, the thing is just incredibly rich in parables, all right? First of all, it contains actually 7 different stories that Jesus told in this one chapter. It has the parable of the sower, sometimes known as the parable of the 4 soils. It's got the parable of the weeds and the wheat. He has, there's the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the yeast. He's got this little twin set, which is the parable of the merchant who finds a pearl, the pearl of great price, the parable of the hidden treasure, and then I think the final one is the parable of the net. Okay, it's a lot of stories that Matthew has organized into a cluster. But not only that, it also contains the only place in the Gospels where Jesus actually explains what one of his stories means. After he tells us the parable of the sower or the 4 soils, and the disciples are like, what was that one about? He walks through it line by line and explains it, which is something he almost never does. In fact, to my memory, the only other time that Jesus ever explains a parable is when he walks through the story of the weeds and the wheat, and that also happens in Matthew chapter 13. Not only does he have 7 stories, not only does he have his only explanations for his stories, but Matthew 13 is the one place, and it parallels also in the other Gospels, but in Matthew 13, he explains why he used stories in the first place. Why is parables his primary mode? So it seems, I think we can make a pretty good case that Matthew has organized all this on purpose, that Matthew chapter 13 would really be a primer on Jesus' stories. Lots of examples, some of them explained, and then a defense of why he did it in the first place. So if you want to get your head around Jesus' parables, this is ground zero. This is where we're going to understand what he was doing, okay? And of all of that, I get like 25 minutes and probably have about 20 left to kind of pick something to go after, okay? There's just way too much content to do in one message. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at verses 10 to 17, which is what Bob read to you a minute ago. It's where Jesus answers the question, why do you speak in parables? Like, what's your game with all this, okay? So I want you to hear Jesus' explanation for why this is his chosen method. And then, very briefly, we're going to just look at that. There's this little double set, this pair of stories that he told. We'll take a look at those briefly at the end, once we've kind of had a chance to think about why is this his chosen method. Okay? You ready? You know where we're going? Let's take a look. I'll read it again. Bob did a great job, but I'm going to load it in now that you know what you're listening for, maybe. So he says this. This is Matthew 13, verse 10. Then the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? And he answered them, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will indeed hear but never understand. You will indeed see but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear. And their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. Now, the way that Matthew frames this is honestly a little bit ambiguous, and you can be forgiven if you don't exactly get the point that Jesus is making. Look at the heart of his claim here in verse 13, okay? I'll just tighten this up and try to make it more plain. In verse 13, Jesus says, this is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. So, to refine that a little bit more, why do you speak to them in parables? Because seeing they don't see, and hearing they don't hear. Now, at this point, there are two possible meanings for that. And some of you probably are like sifting yourselves into one or the other of them. It might be, that Jesus means, I tell parables so that people who see but do not understand will come to understand. Or he could mean, I tell parables so that people who are unwilling to understand will miss the meaning. You get it? These are very different things. He's either telling parables to clarify or to conceal. He's either telling parables so people who don't understand will come to see, or he's telling parables so that people who won't understand will remain oblivious. Do you guys know which one he means? It is number two. It is the latter. Jesus told parables to obscure, not to clarify, which might give you some measure of relief if you've ever been confused by his parables, right? It's also completely upside down from what we might otherwise expect. Most people tell stories to clarify, to explain, to illustrate, to make more plain. But Jesus is doing the exact opposite, and he's very explicit about it. He told stories to conceal and to hide so that people, some people anyway, will not understand his message. He's encoding his message in a language that some people do not speak. Now, if you don't believe me, if you don't see it in the text, or you're just not sure that that's something that Jesus would do, I admit to you that the way that Matthew phrases it leaves it genuinely a little bit ambiguous, and you might pick, well, I'm not sure you're true. Okay, if you look at the parallels in Mark and Luke, all the ambiguity disappears, and it becomes very plain. And not only that, but in the source material that Jesus is quoting, which is Isaiah chapter 6, it's perfectly explicit, okay? The purpose of Jesus' parables is to conceal rather than to reveal. Here it is in Mark 4. He says, to those on the outside, everything is said in parables so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. And then again in Luke 8, he said, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God has been given to you, meaning to the disciples, but to others I speak in parables so that, though seeing they may not see, though hearing they may not understand. Okay? Again, Mark and Luke make it perfectly clear, which might make you think, well, why does he do that? What is his motive in concealing rather than revealing, in hiding rather than exposing? Here's what I want you to do. Remember your childhood. Do you remember playing hide and go seek? Remember that game? What was the purpose of hiding? When you hid, did you not hide so that others would seek you? That's exactly what Jesus is doing right here. He hid his message, he made it obscure so that those whose hearts were hard would miss it. But also so that those whose hearts were soft, who were intrigued, who were curious and thirsty and needy and humble would do the work and dig it and seek it and ultimately find it. Several years ago, Susan McQuaid gifted Kelly and I a subscription to Masterclass, which is this massive library of videos. There's a billion fascinating videos that you can watch. They're all instructive in some way, and we watched a ton of them. But one of our favorites was on interpreting poetry. It featured Billy Collins. Some of you might have read Billy Collins's poems. He was the U.S. Poet Laureate several years ago. And we loved to watch those because it's really fun to unpack a mystery, right? To unravel a puzzle, to figure out the hidden meaning in a message. And poems are like parables. The meaning of a poem is intentionally obscure, which is probably why some of you don't like poems, right? It just takes a lot of work, right? Poems are obscure, but they're also meaningful. And notice this, poems get published. The poet wants to be understood. There's a message that he means to convey to you. He just makes it hard. He wants you to work it out. He wants you to figure it out. He wants you to read it. He wants you to hear it. He wants you to find the message, or at least he wants those that are willing to do the work to find the message and to experience the delight when this thing gives away its secrets, right? Parables are like poems, and they're meant to be chewed on. And Jesus told his parables so that some people, admittedly a subset of the population, would ponder them, would chew on them, and then ultimately would understand and retain them. He told parables so that if you have ears to hear, you would discover the meaning. But if you don't have ears to hear, the encoded message would drift by you and you would not catch its meaning. They're supposed to be hard. They're supposed to require you to lean in so that some people would be enticed and to discover the meaning, and that others would be kept from learning the secret. That's why Jesus told parables. But by the way, it is not a game that is meant to sift out the smart from the stupid. It is a game that sifts out the curious from the disinterested and the humble from the arrogant. Parables are a sieve. They're a filter. They're a way for Jesus to sow broadly, but then reap selectively. And it's possible that might frighten some of you. So if it does, consider this. If you want to have ears to hear, if you're anxious that this might mean that you're left out, the very fact that you want to have ears to hear is an evidence that you do. And if you find this whole thing just seems awfully stupid to you, and you don't have ears to hear, that is evidence that you don't. At least, not today. But there is no telling what this life holds. The experiences that you may come by that might make you more curious than you are right now, nor even the grace that you might be shown that you cannot presently imagine. The story is not over yet for any of us. But today, I would invite you to attend to yourself. Do you want to find his meaning? Are you curious? Are you intrigued? Do his stories hook you? I hope they do. But what I want to do this morning here, in just the few minutes we have left, is I want to look at this little double set of stories that he told. They're probably familiar to you. You've probably seen them before. They're part of this package here in Matthew 13. I'm going to skip over the parable of the sower and the four soils. It's one of his best known stories, probably because he explained it and it makes it a little more accessible. We're not going to look at that. If you want to know what that one means, just read it. He explains it. You don't have to do any work for that one. That's kind of the answer key. It's the sample. And we're not going to look at the parable of the weeds and the wheat. I think that is actually a really insightful parable about that. It makes a lot of sense of things we experience in life. But he also explains it to you, so I'm not going to bother to do that. Instead, I want to look at these two little stories. They're very brief. They're on the shorter end of the spectrum for Jesus. But not only are they enigmatic, but they have almost, you might say, there's a trap in them that you can read them, think you understand it, and then move right on. I would say these are probably among the most commonly misunderstood stories that Jesus told. There's an obvious meaning, but I don't think it's the right meaning, so we'll take a look at this. Okay, these are the stories. They start in verse 44, and we'll see if we can't figure out what Jesus is doing here. Matthew 13:44 says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." Right? That's the first. The second story is just like it, verse 45. "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it." Okay? Now, again, at first blush, these stories seem rather obvious. In each case, you have something valuable. In one instance, it's a treasure, kind of undefined. In the other, it's a pearl. And in each case, you have a person. The first person is simply described as a man, but the second one is a merchant, specifically a merchant of pearls. And each one of these people finds this valuable thing, right? And then, for joy, each person in each of these stories goes and does the same thing. What do they do? What does the character in these stories actually do? They sell everything and obtain the treasure, right? They sell all they have, they buy this desirable thing. Now, most people, you guys, come to this story thinking that the meaning is rather obvious. Jesus is clearly the pearl. He is the treasure. In fact, he is so valuable that if you were to sell all that you own, give everything that you have, and obtain him in the exchange, you would be richer for having done so. He is worth more than everything you have, right? All of that is true. But I do not think it's what the story means, because it fails to consider a key variable. So go through the claims of these stories. Jesus is enormously valuable. That's certainly true. And he is worth more than the rest of your life combined. Also true. But let me ask you something. Did you sell all that you have in order to obtain him? Would you have? I mean, it may be the case that you should have. But did you? Friends, the gospel is not that story. The gospel, tell me this, is the gospel the story of the incredible sacrifice that you made to get Jesus? It's not. It just ain't. Is the gospel the story of the incredible sacrifice that Jesus made to get you? Friends, it is clearly the latter. When you approach this story with the unconscious assumption that you are the protagonist, You are the hero of the story. You are the man. You are the merchant. When you cast yourself as the hero of the story, you end up flattering yourself as if you are the one who does the heavy lifting. But you're not. And Jesus is the hero of that story, as he is the hero of every story. It was for the joy set before him that he endured the cross. He is the one who gave everything he has, including his very life, that he might win you and make you his own. And if he is the merchant, if he is the man, then where are you in the story? You, my friend, are the pearl. You are the treasure. You are the beloved of God. And it is only when you see that story in that light, when you see that he gave everything for you, that you will even begin to make at a smaller scale the trades as you begin to preference him. You guys, he is worthy of your life, but it is not your meager exchange that wins him. It is his radical exchange that wins you. So, be of good cheer. Those of you that perhaps have grown up under some crushing weight of obligation, the gospel is not a story about what you must do. It is a far, far better story about what he has done. And if you have ears to hear it, you will see that story being told over and over and over again to woo you away from the relatively worthless things that you preference to him. You guys, we do love him, but we love him only as a response to his love. It is always and only because he first loved us. So, I would invite you, do not set your hope on your great love of him. Rather, set your hope on his great love of you. And this morning, whatever burdens you're carrying and whatever alternate treasures you are holding on to, if there's something that you just can't find the will to let go of, we'd invite you. Perhaps you might want to come up front and just process with him whatever bauble, whatever bright, shiny thing has seized you, whatever thing that your joy is holding hostage, right? And if you need to process with him that thing that you might release as you experience his preference for you, that may resource you to more greatly preference him, you can come down, you can process that. Or maybe it's some burden that you're carrying and you want to pray about it with somebody else. We have friends in the back by that prayer banner looking thing, and we would love to pray with you. We're going to sing a song, and we're going to praise this God who preferences us over all things as we move our hearts into preferencing him. While we are singing, if you want to pray, you're most heartily welcome to do so. Lord Jesus, we love you not just because you are the great storyteller, but because you are the great hero of the story. Lord, would you give us eyes to see and ears to hear? Would you make us curious? Would you make us humble? Would you let us find in these stories everything that our hearts long for because they point to you? We love you. Amen.
Through every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress, you are my portion, you are my hiding place. I believe you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe through every It's a new rising, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that I knew. All my fears and doubts, they can all come true because